Hi there, and welcome to What the F is Going On. My name is Thijs, and those words were my first thought when I'm trying to think of a charitable word here for the American electorate. Anyway, when they decided to re-elect Mango Mussolini as a president. My second thought was, oh, this is going to be a disaster, an absolute disaster, because, well, you saw the first term. Then the third thought was, well, don't worry, because the sheer incompetence that you saw displayed in the first term is going to manifest again, and he's going to go nowhere. Because he's going to be a lot of talk, hot air, and that's it, because he's going to get absolutely nothing done. However, that didn't quite bear out, and I've been more and more stressed and, well, thought that I had to do something, because what we're watching unfolding right now is a disaster of epic proportions. It's not just affecting Americans, it's affecting all of us. And, well, seeing that I'm not an American, there's not much I can do in America. But what I can do is observe on what's going on in America and how that affects everything else, and generally what's happening, and then try to explain the world as I see it, and hope that, well, that other people either agree with me and tag along, get enlightened, yeah, that's big thoughts by myself, but get some information they didn't have and maybe start observing what's going on, or at least present what they think is happening and why we don't have to worry. So that's the thought about this channel. I'm going to observe what's going on, give you my version, my interpretation of why and how and what, and then from time to time have an explainer video where I have a concept that I take a closer look at and see, well, this is how I see it, because as the title of the channel also indicates, this is a European perspective. I'm not an American, thankfully, and, well, I'm going to observe the world from where I am and present it to you as I see it. So what is going on right now? Well, the US is an obvious focus right now, because contrary to what we thought would happen, well, Trump and his little minions have started disabling and just taking apart anything and everything that could oppose him and his power. I think there's a bit more to that, and we'll look into that in the coming days. But right now, he's just wielding a sledgehammer on everything, any organization that could in any way stand in his way. So that's a problem. Connected to that, we also have the war in Ukraine, the largest land war seen on the European continent since the Second World War, and US has quite a lot of influence into that. They didn't start it. A lot of people think that America provoked Russia into attacking. That's bullshit. But they do wield a lot of influence, and they do hold a lot of the power to decide which way that turns. Well, they did used to hold a lot of power in that regard, and we hope that it's diminished enough that the US turning their back to, well, basically everything decent is not going to affect the Ukrainians too much, and that the EU will be able to pick up the pieces where they fall. And connected to that, we also have an upcoming election in Germany in a little under a week, where the, let's say, hesitant current chancellor is most definitely going to be replaced, and hopefully the next government will be less hesitant and more willing to, get in there and get the shit done so that Russia doesn't gain anything from their illegal invasion of Ukraine. So the happenings in the US is going to take up a lot of space because, well, it's an ongoing event. But as it is an ongoing event, I'm going to focus right now on what's coming up next. And the next thing is going to be the election in Germany. What happened is that the current government in Germany collapsed. There was a coalition government. None of the parties had enough votes in the parliament to actually form a government on their own. So they formed a coalition government. And one of the partners decided that they had enough. the exact details on which way and what happened aren't public knowledge, but the end result was that the Liberal Party decided to leave the government, leaving only the Greens and the Social Democrats, and that's not quite enough to stay in power. So there's a vote of no confidence, and that was it. The current government is on its way out, and the election is to be held this coming weekend. The current situation is that the Christian Conservatives, the CDU, is going to get a majority of the votes, around 30% if I'm not mistaken. Number two is going to be the ADF, or Alternative für Deutschland, which is the closest thing we get to an heir to the Nazi party in Germany. They are under investigation for extremism, right-wing extremism, and at some point the German justice system might just shut them down. That's not going to happen before this election though, but they are set to get around 20% of the vote, which is obviously far less than the 30% of the Christian Democrats, so the Christian Democrats are going to get the first attempt at forming government. And it looks like they're going to try to form a government with the Social Democrats and the Greens. So those two parties might stay in government, but with a new person at the head. And there's also a very good chance, well, it's not a chance, it's going to happen, when the current government, the SPD, led by the SPD, loses the election. The SPD is going to change the leader. So Scholz is out, and the leader of the CDU is on his way into the Chancellor's office. But again, they don't have enough votes. You need 50% or more of the votes to form a government, and well, 30% is obviously quite a bit short of that, which is probably, well, not probably, which is why it's going to be another coalition government, and the only ones who can make a comfortable majority would be the CDU with the SPD and the Greens, and all three are quite vocal about, well, let's take a step back. The current Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, is not a vocal supporter of Ukraine. He talks a lot about helping, but in reality doesn't do much. He does as little as he can get away with, but his partners in government wouldn't let him do nothing. So, well, he had to do something. But when he's gone, the best bet is that the replacement is going to be Boris Pistorius, his current defense minister. And he's probably going to be elected leader of the SPD. So we're going to have a government with the CDU, which is pro-Ukraine, and SPD with the leadership, which is now pro-Ukraine, and supported by the Greens, which is also pro-Ukraine. They have been very vocal in their support of Ukraine. So things are going to change significantly. You might think, well, why don't they form a government with the ADF? Well, all parties have said they want nothing to do with the ADF because, well, Germany and Nazis, and most people are pretty keenly aware of what the ADF actually is, which makes it a bit weird that they're going to get 20% of the vote, but, well, there you go, that's people for you. So we're probably going to see a significant change in German policy, and that could also mean something quite significant for the assistance Ukraine is going to get. Because one of the first things that happened after the invasion was that the German industrial giant Rheinmetall asked for a export inhibition so that weapons could only be exported to Ukraine and to the German Bundeswehr. And Scholz wanted nothing of that. This is a good idea because we've seen it done in France. In France, as a weapons manufacturer, you can only export to Ukraine or sell to the French armed forces. That's it. And Rheinmetall is an industrial giant, but they're limited in what they can send to Ukraine by pre-existing contracts. An export prohibition against sending anything elsewhere would release a lot of industrial capacity in supplying Ukraine. And that might very well happen with the new government. Then there's going to be a lot of internal politics, but that's not really relevant right now. So that's the perspective on the German elections, and the results are almost given. The opinion polls are very, very close at the moment. Well, not close, they're close to one another and all show more or less the same result. That would be the CDU as top party, SPD coming in at a third place, but together with the SPD, that would be enough. Well, with the CDU, of course, that would be enough with the Greens. So that's very, very likely to be the government we're going to see in Germany in about a week. Now, the war in Ukraine has obviously been quite important in the European stage for, well, the almost 3 years it's been going on. But it's taken on another dimension recently, because just a few days ago, the American Vice President, asshole-in-chief, J.D. Vance, held a speech at the Munich Security Conference where you usually discuss, well, world security, probably with the main focus of Europe, because, well, that's where it's held, but you look at the entire world and what's going on. And he insulted every single European nation, not one by one, but in one fell swoop. Because, well, apparently you aren't being democratic if you don't allow right-wing crackpots into power. Yeah, again, we have kind of a history with Nazis here, and especially the Germans. Of course we don't want them in power. And ignoring those 20% of the population, what they want to do, well, that's not anti-democratic, it's common sense. When people want to be, well, Nazis, why would you listen to them? Vance, however, being the American version of a Nazi, doesn't quite see things that way. And he, well, let's just say his speech was not received very well here in Europe. And at the same time, the US sent very strong signals that, well, they're going to throw Ukraine under the bus. They seem to believe that they can do a peace talk with Russia and just decide what's going to happen, and then Ukraine will have to just clack their heels together and do what they're told, and Europe will have to just bend over and support it. And anyone who knows anything about Europe knows that, well, that's quite unlikely. Most European countries are never going to accept something like that. The only thing standing in the way is whether or not the European countries can agree to what they want to do. Because I know it comes as a surprise to a lot of Americans, but Europe isn't a country. It's not a unified country. The EU is a collection of European countries working together, but it's not a nation state, and it likely never will be. Because, well, we do have kind of a history here, and the borders are where they are for a reason. But we have learned to work together, and thank you for the US for forcing that, because, well, they've been a large part of creating the EU project, which they now oppose for some odd reason. Anyways, we've learned to work together, and now it seems that we're going to need to step it up even further and also take hand of the security situation around Europe. And there's going to be an emergency meeting today in Paris because of J.D. Vance doing what he did, and the signals come from the US. We need to decide what we want to do about Ukraine, because what's kind of indicated that's going to happen is not going to be acceptable. The result, however, is currently pending. We'll probably hear something later today or tomorrow, and I'll pick up on that when the results are clear. Anyway, that's it for today. This is the first episode, so it's probably going to change a bit in the future, but right now, this is what I intend to do. Pick up what's going on, put the pieces together and show them to you, and probably from time to time take a deep dive into some aspect. My view on democracy, what's actually going on in Europe between the countries, what do we think about what's going on in China, maybe have a look at China itself as it looks seen from Europe, and, well, stuff like that. I hope I'll see you again, well, tomorrow or whenever I decide to pick up the camera again. See you!